All right, I'm here. Sorry.
Welcome.
Stand by,
Thank you.
please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you well. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right, great.
I'm going to be off in a minute. I'm just going to introduce the panel and then I'm going to sit back and enjoy.
Welcome to MOBE Mondays.
Thank you. It's been a Monday.
Yvette.
Good evening. My name is Yvette Moyo and welcome to MOBE Mondays. Today, we are going to have a wonderful discussion, but first I'll tell you a little bit about MOBE. The MOBE is Marketing Opportunities in Business and Entertainment. For 12 years, twice a year, we presented advanced marketing symposium series, and we were able to generate $200 million in business to our registrants, both independent entrepreneurs and those working in the corporate world who were interested in growing the opportunities for African Americans. And we put the two industries together, really with several industries, but if you can think of sports and entertainment on one side and then corporate marketers on another side. And we were able to facilitate deals from sponsoring concert tours and HBCU games and things like that with major artists, as well as first internet introduction for artists on the Warner Records label and with Time Warner. And so we were considered innovators. We actually went to the White House briefing on Blacks in the Internet and Technology, and that is where in 1998, many of those first adapters to the internet were able to meet and serve the African American market. So we can talk about that more and more, but just wanted to let you know that we were on for 12 years, off for 12 years. And 3 years ago, we relaunched MOBE. The brand is back because it offered value for our participants. Now we have a whole new generation of individuals that we hope to inspire and to have accelerate what they want in the industry. So tonight, oftentimes we talk about diversity and inclusion in ways that are primarily viewed as ways to include women and underrepresented minorities in the workforce. But more recently, racial equity has entered into the corporate conversation. And included in the discussion, it has a prominent role in now, given the disruptive times that we're living in today. Just right now, this is right now conversation about how corporations are rethinking their experiences and the experiences of those that they hire. So we're talking about some global demographics that corporations are dealing with, and a workplace that's very much changed from the way it was, say, when we started MOBE 25, 27 years ago. And so in the workplace is becoming increasingly imperative to integrate between interrelated disciplines, which include, by example, corporate social responsibility now, okay, which was not necessarily in the conversation, and cross-cultural marketing. So today we're just gonna take a look at what that means in the marketplace, and our guests tonight will discuss and illustrate how some organizations navigate and impact change to thrive and grow in this challenging new world, especially when the need is to be sensitive, proactive, and relevant now to the Black community, to the Black marketplace, and to the Black consumer market. So the moderator tonight is De-Dee Loftin Davis. And
Hi, everyone.
She's communications chair of the Greater Philadelphia NAACP. I'm a lifetime member, by the way. Recommend you be one too.
Family, okay. I see you. I see you.
And she's going to lead tonight's MOBE Monday session. So welcome to MOBE Mondays, Dee and panelists, and I will sit back and appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Yvette, for having us. And everyone out there watching the webinar, if you're not linked into Ms. Yvette, you need to. This is a Wonder Woman. She started her business from practically nothing to 200 million. And if anything, she knows how to mentor, she knows how to speak to the issues, and she knows how to get to the point. So if you haven't linked up with her, you should. All right, again, my name is De-Dee Loftin Davis. I'm excited to be here. Everyone who's out there in the webinar, settle in because you're in for a treat. Tonight we have, let's ladies first, no offense, Greg, I'm still old school, okay? Let's begin with, thanks. Let's begin with Star Carter. Star Carter is with you, I almost at US Bank, but you are actually with Kanarys. And then we have, of course, Mita Mallick, who's with Unilever, parent company of Ben & Jerry's, and ooh, we're gonna get to that Ben & Jerry's statement. Go, y'all. And of course, Greg Cunningham, US Bank, thank you very much for being here. Before I get into my questions, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, what you do at the company, and how you got to where you are right now, because all of you are accomplished, you're brilliant. You've worked hard to be there, and I wanted to honor that. So I will begin with Mita, and then of course Star, and then Greg.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and including me this evening. I'm Mita. I'm quarantining with my 5- and 7-year-old and my husband in Jersey City in 1,500 square feet. So if you've got backyard space, I'm super jealous right now. And as we have a serious conversation tonight, I will mute myself as appropriate because I know there's a lot of interesting things we'll be talking about this evening. I had inclusion in cross-cultural marketing at Unilever. What does that mean? It means that we look at diversity of thought doesn't happen without diversity of representation. I think that's really important because I think a lot of people are using the word diversity of thought, and I think that can often be coded language. So to be really clear about what that means. And then what does that mean on the cross-cultural marketing side? It's about, okay, so now that you have the diversity of representation, and that's a journey for all of us, how do your products and services show up in the marketplace? What's the content? What's the innovation? How are you authentically connecting with purpose to the communities you serve? And so I think Unilever is one of the first companies that's really thinking about it holistically, and inclusion is really right now a business imperative in terms of how you show up. And I have a long career as a marketer, and I've been doing this work for 4 years and was tapped by my CEO to take this role. So that's the short of my journey.
Well, Mita, you had me at Jersey Girl, because I'm a Jersey girl. So, hey, Jersey. Yes, 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 yes. My husband, he's a Philly boy, but I'm always forever, and you shaking your head, yes, Jersey, I understand. Rep your city, rep your state. Okay, Star, I'd love for you to share as well. I believe you have a Harvard University background, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I have to represent Texas here because I'm from Texas, so that's where I'm coming from. I'm in Dallas, Texas. So I'm so excited to be here tonight with my fellow esteemed panelists. So thanks for having me. I have a slightly different perspective than folks on the panel. I started my career in the legal world, so worked for big law for about a dozen years. I personally saw the workplace inequities as I came up through my career, whether it was just inequity in workplace assignment, whether it was promotional opportunities, you name it, I saw it, I experienced it. And so I really wanted to make some changes here, just like my fellow panelists, but instead of going into DEI work within a corporation, I left the corporate world altogether to start a company in 2018. And the whole being of the company, it's called Kanarys, like canary in a coal mine, identifying toxic workplaces or non-toxic workplaces that are good for people of color, Black community to work for and really know that they can thrive at a certain place. So how do we do that? We do that by collecting feedback from the Black community and other diverse individuals about their lived workplace experiences. And we combine that with objective data. What does a specific company offer related to diversity, equity, inclusion? Is there maternity leave? Are there ERGs? Is there a diversity officer? Do they report to the C-suite? The list goes on. And then we aggregate that data, we anonymize it, and we provide insight to companies about things they can do to increase their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So I'm more of an outsider perspective, not within a big company, about what companies can do. And I've seen a lot through my time at Kanarys since 2018. I'm excited to be part of this space, and I can't wait to share my knowledge alongside Greg and Mita.
Well, I'm sure Kanarys is proud to have you, and you have me at Agent of Change, okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. I love that. Okay, Mr. Greg Cunningham, I see you in your white shirt.
What's
On
up,
the
Dee Dee?
island, Phil, I see that, okay.
You know, we're trying to do it here in Minneapolis. I'm Greg Cunningham. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at US Bank, which is headquartered here in Minneapolis, which obviously is forefront in the news these days, and not for all the reasons that we would like to, but it is a call to action for our country and our companies and all of us as individuals. You know, I share a lot in common with both of my fellow panelists. First of all, Mita, I had spent most of my career in marketing as well. I've been at US Bank for a little over 4 years, but spent most of my career, 17 years at Target in marketing, and actually created the multicultural marketing practice there. And Star, I just have a tremendous amount of heart for entrepreneurship. And I really think the path to economic mobility, certainly for the Black community, is through entrepreneurship. And so I'm excited to be here. My path to the work of DE&I is a little bit uncommon. I did not have a background in the space or in HR. And so much like Mita and the work that Unilever is doing, we have I think a pretty holistic approach that looks across both inside the organization and thinks about customers and communities and how we can make it a business imperative. So I'm thrilled to be here, Dee-Dee, and looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. So everyone, welcome. Okay, so we're going to dig right in because we only have, oh my goodness, 54 minutes. So let me try to get everything in, okay? Because, you know, I wish we could go longer, but we can't. All right. So y'all, Black trauma is real. So let's talk about this. We've had 3 murders in 10 days. It started with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, as well as now, of course, Mr. George Floyd, due to, of course, law enforcement, due to systemic racism, due to institutionalized racism. On top of all that, during COVID, during a Trump presidency. Okay, 3 strikes right there. So for companies that are having Black employees return, how can companies show support? Because we're grieving. We're at the protests, you know, with Mr. Floyd. You know, it's beautiful to see all of the different races, all of the different ages, multi-generational and family. I love that. But when the protests die down, we're coming back to work, many of us, into corporate seats, into corporations. And how do we reconcile all of that during COVID when we've had relatives pass away, senior relatives, some young relatives pass away of COVID? So my question to all 3 of you, and of course I'll begin with Star and then Mita and then Greg chime in. How can companies address first our grieving, first, and then of course our anger, because it's rightfully so. When you enter death and murder into the conversation, it gets real. So how can companies better support Black employees without patronizing?
Yeah, I'll start that. There's a number of things I think companies can do. I think the very first thing is to make sure that companies are making a public statement about what's going on. I think it's really important that companies put it out there. I think your Black employees, especially if you're a bigger company, can take silence as complicity, as possible betrayal. So I think it's important to show your employees that you support them by making a public statement about racial justice in our current situation, about what's going on in the Black community. I think it's really important too that that public statement is not just we stand with you, but actually list actions that a company is doing to show solidarity and that they're standing with the Black community. I think it's very important within a company to have leaders reach out to their Black employees, whether they're managers and they have a team. I think it's really important. I've heard horror stories of companies reaching out on Zoom team meeting calls in front of everybody else, which inevitably resulted in a lot of the non-Black employees speaking a lot. I think it's important to reach out one-on-one. I think it's important to email, text, make sure your Black employees are doing well. What you just named, it, it's heavy. I mean, Black employees are dealing with a lot. I think it's very important to offer mental health resources to Black employees. We're having to balance a lot. We're holding back tears in Zoom meetings. We're having to balance what's going on, seeing our Black brothers and sisters die at the hands of police. it is a lot for anybody to balance, and your Black employees are having to carry on work as normal, maybe remotely now, maybe in the office once COVID gets over. But I think it's very important that specific resources are offered to your Black employees. And I think lastly, because I think this list can go on and I want to leave some stuff for our other panelists, I think it's important if you have employee resource groups, Black employee resource groups, that you utilize them right now, that you reach out to the Black leaders of your Black ERG for support. You make sure they're funded. You have your DEI leaders within an organization, coordinate with them and talk about how the ERG can express their feelings of their Black employees and how they can make demands and requests of their executive team on what their company can be doing to stand in solidarity with the Black community. So I'll pause there because I know that's a lot, and I know my panelists are doing a lot at their respective organizations.
Well, I love what you said. I love what you said, because I always say attrition without accountability is a hot mess, and it's just platitudes. So I appreciate how you actually listed actionable steps your company is working on and has done. Mita.
Well, Star is the expert here. I'm just going through that.
I don't know about that.
I'm impressed. No, it's actually really great to hear what you do and thinking about how we hold ourselves accountable. So I was very with intention listening to what you were saying. We're all on our journey. There are things we can be doing better. There are things we're doing well. At Unilever, I've been proud that we have made a statement. Fabian Garcia is our US CEO, and you'll see it on his LinkedIn page. We've been doing our best to keep in touch with our employees every week, sending letters and notes. I think that's more from the corporate perspective, as you were talking about. I think this is such an important time to just also be checking in with people. And I said, as we were chatting earlier, that I come into this conversation as an inclusion leader, as a woman of color. I identify with the Black community. I don't identify as Black. And I know we'll get into a conversation of people of color and the Black community. I think it's so important for me to say that when I check in with people, and have our leaders do the same and acknowledge how you're entering the conversation. And just to say, this is devastating what is happening. It is a flame that has been reignited. George Floyd's murder was one of many, many, many. And it is the foundation of how this country was built on slavery and institutions of racism, which makes people uncomfortable to talk about. That's what we have to talk about. It's the truth. And to say that I am not Black, I don't know what it's like to be Black. I am trying to build empathy and compassion to understand that experience, but for me to be vulnerable and say that. And when you're checking in, I say as a leader, you're just checking in to let your Black employees know that you see them and you hear them. And that is not the most, as Star says. A check-in is different than a courageous conversation on race, which is another part. A check-in is just to say, I am here and I see what's happening. It's not to then call out your Black employees and ask them in a team meeting to engage, because that is asking people to re-experience trauma over and over again. And it's very interesting as a marketer, because you're taught that storytelling is so powerful, but to what expense are those stories being told? And so another critical piece of this on an ally journey, like you might think you're an ally, but you don't know until you know. And I think the first step is to really learn about the experience of what it's like to be Black in America, and start with history. And you don't have to ask a Black person to know that. There's so much content out there. So start educating yourself. And I keep telling people, now is the time for us to stand up as an ally for the Black community. And it starts with educating ourselves. And so I'll be honest, I also struggle with, and we have an amazing BRG called Black Excellence at Unilever. And it is not their burden to educate.
Can you repeat that? What is it called?
Black Excellence at Unilever.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, we call it BU. And
okay.
For all the marketers out there, it is, but it's not their job to tell us what to do as a company. Right. And so that's the balance of like wanting to have a seat at the table, but also it's not their job to fix this. It is our job. It's leadership's job. It's everybody's job. So also respectfully, I struggle with, I look to BRGs for input and guidance, but they're not supposed to be driving it. I am with leadership. So that's the struggle as well that I have.
You know, I appreciate everything you said, especially your transparency and your honesty when you say that, you know, while you are a person of color, you're not Black. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a company doing trainings and speaking, you know, after the training to Black employees. And they're just, as you know, and we've been putting it on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, we're just exhausted. But I see, and maybe it's just me, I see maybe a little bit of a shift, because now we're having authentic allies. We have the performative allies, we have the allies for a hot minute, you know, and then we have the allies who are really white supremacists. But I see an authenticity in allies of brown and of course of white people that are telling other people in their community, no, no, no. It's not the Black community that has to educate us. But we've been educating y'all, can we be frank, since, I don't know, 1865 about who we are, you know, who we represent. And so at this point, 400 years, we're tired. So I appreciate that transparency. Also, I see a shift where there's more conversations around not just being authentic, but actually speaking to a problem that we always, you know, look at when we have someone who's white or someone who is brown or red, and they speak like they're an expert on the Black experience, but they're not Black. So, you know, me being an anti-racist, of course, educator, I will call them out respectfully, you know, in private if we're having a conversation, because it's so disingenuous. We're always having, as you know, history shows, things taken away from us and burdens added in its place. But here now, it just feels different. I don't know about you all, but it just feels different with the protest with Mr. George Floyd, everyone chiming in. We were discussing earlier, which I love. I was watching, I believe, Good Morning America, shout out, that the protest right now, it is the largest protest in history. It has officially surpassed the women's protests and the Me Too protest and March for Our Lives protest. And not that we're in competition, but it just speaks to the country is so tired of being divided. That's not who we are. That's not what we are as a people. And so I just love to see that we're not only the biggest protest, but there are people who are actually speaking up, you know, and saying, you know, it's time for us. It's our turn, you know, to have a courageous conversation, and we're not Black. So thank you for that. Hey, Greg. So again,
Hey.
Same question. If you remembered it, I know it's been a minute.
I got
so
it.
I apologize.
Following along, I'm here. I think it's a wonderful question, and I you know, this notion of grief is a critical one, because we are grieving as a community. We're grieving individually, and it's difficult to show up in a professional environment when you're grieving. And so I'll come back to that in a second. But what I've said to, you know, my white brothers and sisters who come to me and say, you know, I don't understand what it is to be Black, and, you know, but I'm sympathetic. And my response is always, I don't need you to understand, but I need you to want to. And so I think there's this, this generation, and the reason you're seeing these protests be so large is I think we have a generation of young people primarily who refuse to accept that George Floyd's death is not an indictment on their whole generation and how they see the world and how they want the world to be. This generation that we counted out as being apathetic and, you know, lazy and entitled, well, they're rising up. And it's really exciting to see. And I think it's gonna, well, hopefully it carries over into the ballot box and they all register to vote and go vote. But I do think there's also, you know, in terms of the workplace, what most companies do is most companies want diversity. They'll hire for diversity, and then they manage to assimilation. You know, as soon as you walk through the door, they have a set of cultural norms that typically define what leadership looks like, what advancement looks like. And so one of the things that we've done is looked at not only our formal policies and practices, which you have to do. So your question about Black people going back to work, well, there's some people who ain't gonna wanna go back to work. And you have to review as an organization those policies and practices that said, we're gonna need to be a little bit more flexible here, because the new normal will not be what it was before. We ain't going back. If there are people who actually don't wanna be in a cubicle setting in the office, what all of this has taught us is we can actually still get the job done. And for Black people in particular, who are far more predisposed to contract, when America caught COVID-19, we died at disproportionate rates. And so companies have to be aware enough to understand that a full review of all of your policies and practices are going to be required. A full review of all of your talent practices are going to have to be required. And there's got to be a real commitment to making real investment with not only through philanthropy, which I always think is vitally important, but this really speaks to the work that I think, Mita, you do, is I think there's a fundamental commitment to doing meaningful business with Black-owned businesses is critical, because at the root of all of it is systemic racism, which leads to poverty. There is, for every, because I'm in banking now, I pretend to be a banker. Like I'm not a banker, but I play one on TV. The wealth gap in this country, McKinsey just released a study that talked about the racial wealth gap in this country. The racial wealth gap is $1.5 trillion. If we close that racial wealth gap in the next 8 years, it would add 4 to 6% in GDP growth to our economy. We've never seen that kind of growth. And it would mean $11,000 to $12,000 for every American.
You said 1.3 trillion?
1.5.
1.5 trillion.
For every white household, this is, you can look it up, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors did a study in 2016. White households median wealth, I'm talking wealth, not income, median wealth is $170,000. In Black households, it's 17.
Say it again.
170,000.
Say it again.
Wealth, household wealth. White families have $170,000 in household wealth. Black families have 17.
And would you attribute that to racism? Systemic and institutionalized racism?
What else would you attribute it to?
Thank you very much. Okay, continue, please, sir.
That doesn't happen by accident. That's by design.
By design.
And what we have to accept, particularly in the industry I'm in, right? Because we all know how the financial services industry has contributed to that in very ugly ways, through redlining and other policies and formal practices. What we need is people to enter into these industries that can change it from the inside. And so part of our commitment was not only to advance Black leadership in our organization, but to make $100 million commitment annually to support Black-owned businesses, to support communities through philanthropy. It's all of it. It's, there has to be a holistic approach, and organizations have to commit to making the change as part of who they are at their core. And I agree with all the statements, and every company is releasing statements, but you know what, at the end of the day, our community is looking for specifics, and they're looking for specific actions. And I think that's what's going to separate those organizations who are just talking from those who are actually really doing the work.
I love everything you just said, including the statistics. And I truly believe corporate America, and for that matter, corporate world globally, is really not ready for the influx of, let's see, millennials who are now just coming into an awakening of racial disparities. And of course, following behind that, Generation Z, who right now statistically, they are ushering in the browning of America. And you're having Black kids. I was looking at Good Morning America, and I was just looking at some of the interviews and looking at some of the clips. This protest going on right now to honor, of course, Mr. George Floyd and his family, it's not just on the basis of Black community, white community, it's multi-generational.
Yes.
Different ages, families coming together. I saw a child as young as 4 years old out there with a sign, and a little Black girl, I don't know if you saw her, just gorgeous. She looked like she was marching, to the tune of Harriet Tubman. and the protests. So when you have, kids who are coming of voting of age, and now who are coming into corporate America, I really have some concerns about corporate America being ready, not just for Black, of course, employees coming back, what we've gone through, but for the young people who are tech savvy, interconnected on the internet. and who are unapologetically themselves, whether hetero, whether queer, whether non-binary, but all of them have one thing in common. Most of them now, and have been for the longest time, are anti-racist. They are determined to dismantle racism in their lifetime. So corporate America, get ready.
Dee-Dee,
Okay.
can I make one other point related to that? I agree with you 100%, and I don't think corporations are ready, but to your point, they better get ready. But I also want to acknowledge that most people don't work in corporate America. Most people work for small businesses in this country. And to me, if we are going to build economic mobility in the Black community, it's going to start with small businesses. We've got to support small businesses. We got to create businesses that create jobs. And that's where the big companies who have capacity can help and take real action, is by supporting the creation of small businesses, supporting our entrepreneurs in our community who create jobs, that create sustainable incomes, that build community vitality, that circulate the revenue in our own communities. It's going to take small business. So I'm not diminishing the importance of corporations, because they play a really important role. But I think the real key is how those large companies and people who are in those large companies actually support programs and sustainable initiatives to lift up entrepreneurs and small business.
And to your point, Greg, I know all three of you are statistics. You guys speak statistics and research like me, and I love that. To your point, with Generation Z coming of age and voting and coming into the workforce, according to the research, Generation Z, they prefer to work in community.
Absolutely.
They prefer to work in small businesses. So corporate America, who's trying to recruit Generation Z, along with ex-millennials who are between Generation Z and millennials, who have the same mindsets of coming into community and working in small business. Again, if corporate America is not addressing racism, they're losing a big, not only employee base, but even customer base. Right now, I think it's 60%, maybe a little bit more, of consumers are really outspoken. This is 2 years ago. Are really outspoken about their companies and who they are loyal to. 60% of consumers say they want a mission or a purpose-driven company.
Yes.
So with all this going on, COVID, racism, the murder of George Floyd, the protests, corporate America, they're the time of putting their heads, leaders, in the sand, and frontline managers saying, well, my daddy did it this way, so we're going to do it this way. There's going to be challenges, and if you rise to the occasion, you're going to see it in your bottom line financially, because customers want to support companies that not just say platitudes, oh, we're anti-racist, because we do have companies out there that say we're anti-racist, and next thing you know, they're giving out, money to white supremacist organizations, but they're really, invested companies. I was reading a statistic, 73% of Hispanics and 68% of whites believe that the Black community drives culture. That's in 2018. It's 2020. With anti-racism and with protests going on now, I can't imagine that number going down. So I really appreciated getting to you, Mita, how Ben & Jerry's came out with a strong statement. And let me read part of it, because they were unapologetic. I showed my husband, he's just like, babe, what? And he was just so excited, when he saw this in the community. Let's see here. I'm going to read just a short amount because we're running low on time. But silence, they began hard and strong. Silence is not an option. This has been in Jerry's. Silence is not an option. Begin with a plea to all Americans to not forget George Floyd, a Black man killed by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, whose death set off protests around the country, along with killings of other Black Americans, and they even mentioned the names, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. The murder of George Floyd was the result of inhumane police brutality. Yes, they called it out. That is perpetuated by a culture of white supremacy. The Post reads, what happened to George Floyd was not the result of a bad apple. It was the predictable consequence of a racist and prejudiced system and culture that has treated Black bodies as the enemy from the beginning. So give me a second. let me have my come to Jesus moment. They called it out. So Mita, being that Unilever is the parent company of Ben & Jerry's, and Ben & Jerry's has always been outspoken against racism and has a history of it, not just joining the anti-racism bandwagon. What do you say to that?
Yeah, they have a strong history from Voting Rights Act to 4 years ago, standing very strong against for Black Lives Matter, against white supremacy, which is the other side of the coin, which is what they came out so strong. I'm just really proud to work for a company where you see all of our brands, whether it's the history of Sundial and Shea Moisture, and if you're following anything that they're doing, whether it's the money that they're giving to activists, and they had the New Voices Fund even before, where they were actually supporting women of color entrepreneurs. And it's so hard to get funding, as Greg was talking about earlier, in terms of the economy and where that money should be going. And then doing things like Instagram live events where they're talking about the mental health and the state of the physical health of Black men and women and what's happening. And so, even before that, Dove Crown Coalition, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Crown Coalition Act, the coalition co-founded by Dove and 3 other partners to end hair discrimination and what Black women uniquely face in the workplace because of Black hair being so tied to their identity, and having 7 states pass that legislation. So more and more, our brands with purpose are making sure that they live up to their purpose, is what I would say. I would also say, on the other end, we're trying to do some courageous things at Unilever. We don't call it white supremacy, we call it unpacking white privilege in the workplace, which when I did that 3 years ago, people said I remember going to a D&I practitioner roundtable. They were talking about best practices, and somebody, before I could even say it, you should never talk about white privilege in the workplace. Don't ever do a training on that. And I was like, well, I guess I just failed, because I did that with Robin DiAngelo, who wrote White Fragility, came to her office. A few times she came. She doesn't return my calls. Hey, Robin, I know you're super famous now, but Robin, no.
Shout out.
Robin is phenomenal. But those are the uncomfortable things, and I had other facilitators since then. Robin is she's wildly successful and doing amazing things. But those are the really tough conversations to have, right? We can talk about what you need to know about your Black talent and how to look at diverse slates, but starting with the leaders in many cases who are white. And of course, I straddle in between because I'm not white and I'm not Black, I'm brown. There's also the brown leaders, right? But understanding, for the leaders, what does white privilege look like? And for many of them, it's just been how it is their entire life. And so for the first time for them to unpack it and really think about, questions like, I'll never forget going through Robin's training and going through these questions, which I went through with a white male leader. Questions like, tell me the first time you had a teacher of the same race. And my partner said, my entire life. Yeah. And I said, 11th grade physics, Columbia University. I distinctly remember that's the first time I had a woman of color teaching me. So, it's just fascinating, right? So it just really starts with unpacking how you've lived your life.
Love that. I got questions, okay? I got questions and questions, but Facebook Live got questions as well. So let me go ahead. And we're being nice tonight. Good job, Facebook. I'm proud of you. Okay, so from Facebook, this is for Greg. How did diversity and inclusion play out for U.S. Bank for those minority small business owners? With reference to the PPP support and minority small business loans.
How did it play out?
Yes, how did diversity and inclusion play out for U.S. Bank for those minority small business owners with reference to the PPP support and minority small business loans?
It played out the same way it did for most financial institutions. I think, in round one, what brought to light was that many of those small business owners didn't have the banking relationship. So again, going back to where there's bias in the system, there wasn't a clear pathway for minority businesses to really access those funds in the first round. I think it was pretty publicly exposed how, there were a lot of large organizations who leveraged those funds, and many of the small businesses got squeezed out, which is why we had a second round of funding. And by the way, there's about $70 billion still available in PPP funding in this next round. And so what we've done specifically is done outreach to minority businesses and Black-owned businesses in particular. And one of the things we're working on, because we heard very loud and clear from many small businesses and Black-owned in particular, the process is extremely complicated. And if you didn't have a banking relationship, just going through the process of filing the paperwork and engaging the website was a really difficult thing. So we're actually setting up a team of folks who are going to be prepared to walk people through that process. We're going to be announcing some things in the next week or so, because the origination deadline is June 30th, by the way, if anybody's interested. And we're going to help support small businesses through the process because it's extremely complicated. The short answer to your question is it highlighted bias in the system once again. And so once those things are revealed to us, we try to quickly pivot and make sure that we make it right. I will say though, almost a quarter of all of our funding went to minority-owned businesses through our PPP program funding. So we're really proud of that.
Thank you, Facebook. And I'll come back to you, I promise, but just a bit of housekeeping. Only give me one question, okay? Don't put 5 in there in the paragraph, okay? Appreciate you, Facebook. I'm calling on you, okay? I'm calling you out. This one, of course, is for STAR. The NAACP, shout out to the NAACP, especially Amber Branch. Hi, y'all. Okay, legal defense team were some of the first responders on the scene of the tragic Ahmaud Arbery murder. What are some ways companies can address racial equity and social justice?
That is the question. I think we hit on some of these, right? I view some of the stuff happening right now with respect to the societal fight on injustices. Really what happens in corporate America, I view that as a microcosm of what's happening in society as a whole. I think there's a number of things companies can do. I know companies are focused on the bottom line, but I think it's very important they focus on fighting racial justice as well, as this has all come to light with George Floyd and the, 1,260 Black people that have been killed by the hands of police since 2015, according to the Washington Post database.
Say it again.
1,260 Black people.
Those are all Black
killed.
people. They had Black, white, everyone family. They had friends. They had hopes. They had dreams.
Yes.
They were people, not just numbers for those out there.
So I think it's just made it very clear that companies, and we need companies to step forward because this is a fight that everybody across all kinds of verticals should be contributing to. So I think one of the first things companies could do is adopt a very specific anti-racism policy. I think a lot of companies do good. I think it became almost a trendy. I think a lot of companies historically focus on diversity and then focus on what we say at Kanarys as food, flags, and fun. You know, Black History Month comes, let's get a Black speaker and let's move on to the next thing. Let's do one unconscious bias training for the whole year and call it a day. So I think it's very important that there's ongoing training, not just with unconscious bias, and that's very important. I'm not trying to downplay that, but also let's go deeper. Let's do racial equity training. Let's talk specifically about the history and how that's infiltrated every single system in our country with respect to institutional and systemic racism. A perfect example of adopting such policy, we all saw what happened with Amy Cooper and the African-American bird watcher.
Amy Cooper, yes, we've all been Amy Cooper at one point, if we're honest.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have. And her employer, Franklin Templeton, was able to quickly point to their no racism tolerance policy, and they fired her, as they should have. So I think it's very important to adopt those kind of policies. I think the other big thing is, and Greg hit on this, I believe it was Greg, pay equity. Every company, you know, it's great to talk about what you're going to do externally, but I think corporations need to focus on, at least as a first step, making sure their house is in order before reaching out to other houses. And what we see with these corporations is that There's this gut feeling that everything's fine. There's no systemic lens to what they're doing with their policies and procedures. How are you doing your hiring? How are you doing your promotions? One of our advisors for Kanarys was the former Chief Diversity Officer at Coca-Cola, Steve Bucciarati. And if you don't know about Coca-Cola, they had the biggest racial discrimination settlement to this day with their employees. They had all kinds of diversity behind closed doors. If you looked at their demographics, they looked like they had everything perfect. But what was happening and what he has,
as well, and glossy, glossy pictures in magazines.
Yep.
All of
And
them.
that's exactly right. It's a marketing thing. But when you pull back the curtains, DD,
Right.
there's stuff going on. And that's what was happening at Coke. And I think one of the big things that companies can do is do a wage equity analysis. Make sure your home's in order. See if there are outliers within specific demographics. And if you don't have something defensible to explain that person being an outlier in pay, get them up to speed with the rest of their colleagues. It's so important to do a wage equity analysis. I think one of the biggest things companies could do as well, and again, I'm speaking from an outsider consultant view, not someone internally like Mita and Greg, but corporate lobbying. A lot of these big companies lobby, right? They lobby about their business interests. If every big corporation that spends big money on lobbying expenditures, and a lot of them do, dedicated, 35, 40% specific of those lobbying dollars for drafting and supporting bills that would improve the conditions for communities of color, whether that's for equal access to education, achieving criminal justice reform, ending racial oppression, we would see a huge difference through politics, which is important. And because these companies have deep pockets and dedicate a lot of money to that, I think that is another way companies could really move the needle forward in racial justice. But I think internally, it's really important that they look within themselves. They make sure that they have the procedures and policies and that they're seeking feedback from their Black employees. Are our initiatives working? 97% of these mid-sized and large companies have DEI initiatives and policies, and like you said, beautiful marketing materials, but 75% of diverse employees do not think they personally benefit from them. There's a mismatch, and I think it's very important that companies look toward their Black employees and see if they feel like they're benefiting from these initiatives, because they're supposed to be there for them specifically.
All of what you said, it's time to take the superficiality out of DEI. Let's get real. The protest is a wake-up call for everyone. People are ready to get real about racism, about their lived lives. Facebook land, I love you. I just said, don't give me 7 questions in one paragraph, just one question. Mita, this is for you, Mita. They're being nice, so I will give you their question. And we only have 10 minutes, Facebook land. Thank you, Jersey girl. Okay. This one is for Mita. At Unilever, did Ben & Jerry's have to get the approval of the parent companies before making such a controversial? That's interesting. That's code, but I'll come back to that. Controversial public statement. If so, what was the internal feeling behind the many tweets to boycott? I'll read it again.
No, I got it.
Got it? Okay.
I don't want to take up time. I got it. Listen, I think Ben & Jerry's has a very strong history of being an ally for the Black community. Just look up the history. We talked about it. Voting Rights Act, Black Lives Matter, now standing up to white supremacy and dismantling white supremacy. They also fight for legislation. So I don't think it was a question for us. It was very clear. Now, listen, we're a global local company like any organization. Anyone works in a large organization, there's always discussions about these things. But for Ben & Jerry's, and again, the reputation of that brand and what they've built, it was the right thing to do. It was the next thing to do in their journey. And we're proud of that.
Thank you, thank you. This one is for anyone on the panel. They're asking, as a Jersey girl, please share your thoughts on the unarmed man, Maurice Gordon, that was shot down by a state trooper on Garden State Parkway last month. And I'll give you a little bit of a background, not to surprise you. But there's dash cam video capturing the struggle of a fatal shooting by a police officer. I will chime in on that one as well, since you did say Jersey girl. Unacceptable. It's still under investigation. There's still more details coming out. So to speak on that, I think would be a little bit rushed. We know that most likely there was some things that were protocols that were not followed. But again, to speak to that right now, I think would be premature. I'll go to the next question. Oh, okay, we have to wrap it up pretty soon. So it's going by so fast. No. Okay, so let's see here. We'll do rapid fire then. Okay, Facebook, I'm sorry. We told you come early. Okay, sorry, I can't answer these questions. Okay, rapid fire. To your point, Mita, you're dealing with the, you're the spearheading of cultural immersion project. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so 3 years ago, we created a cultural immersion series to help our marketers increase their cultural competency. So it's no longer, we know, it's no longer enough to have unconscious bias training. So how do you as a marketer, like the job of a marketer, De-Dee, is I know you so intimately well that I can serve you product or a service that you would be delighted by. But that means I have to know you and the history of your community. And so for us, we launched this series, the first of which I'll describe was called The Black Experience in America. And it's a 4.5-hour session. It was live at the time. Now I'm making it virtual. Taught by a white ally, someone who talks about the mistakes they made with the community and someone who identifies with the community. The first 2.5 hours is understanding the institution of slavery. Why does it have modern day repercussions? Things that many of us did not learn in school. You start to then understand the themes of colorism, body integrity, dehumanization of Blacks for centuries. And then you start to look at all kinds of content. And now you start to study it with that base and start to look at it through the lens of the Black consumer. We have that, we have LGBTQ, Latinx. Last year, we just launched Muslim experience. We have trained over 5,000 marketers, both globally and locally. We've also started training our agencies who've stepped up. And what I'll say to you is this, is that people say, what are the results? And I say, as a marketer, and Greg will appreciate this, I was always taught data, insights, action. And I grew up in the beauty world. But Mita, trust your gut. Trust your gut, even when you see all that data. And I say, but my gut is dangerous. It's a product of my life experiences. So we're retraining the guts of marketers. And I think as you see some of the things that are coming out in the marketplace from Unilever, know it is because we're trying to upskill and educate and increase the cultural competency of our marketers. And that's so important.
Awesome, thank you. And we have a compliment from Facebook to all panelists. They say just a huge thank you to the esteemed panelists and their contribution to our collective communities. So thank you. Yes, and I echo that. Thank you so much. We'll do rapid fire, and I will begin with Greg. What are your diversity and inclusion goals? Being head of diversity, of course, at US Bank, what are your diversity and inclusion goals, and how do you measure that to make sure that they are effective?
Well, we have goals across 4 different pillars, starting with the workplace, where we measure and we set goals for representation at 3 different levels of the organization, including our most senior levels. We set goals around promotions, we set goals around hiring, and we set goals around retention. Our CEO gets a scorecard every quarter, which I sit down and review with him and our senior staff, as well as present to our board twice a year. And then every vice chair in our organization, so every one of our business heads also has that same scorecard for his or her line of business. The second area is marketplace. So we also set goals around consumers. We measure everything from consumer sentiment, reputation, obviously revenue, things like market share and those sorts of things, as well as customer experience and the customer's experience both in our branches and in our online channels. Third, we have supplier diversity goals. We currently spend over 15% of our procurement with minority-owned businesses, and we track that and set goals around minority business spend. We've actually, in our statement last week, made a pledge to double the number of Black-owned businesses that we partner with next year. And then the final one is community. And we measure our community impact, our philanthropy, who our philanthropy is going to. Right now, our social impact strategy is all about making meaningful investments in low to moderate income community, supporting women and people of color. So that is, and then we measure everything from our investments in affordable housing, nonprofits that support specifically those areas I talked about, as well as a number of other things. But we measure across all those. Those are the 4 pillars of diversity for us. As I said before, it's not just an internal workplace strategy. It's about how we bring the whole bank to this notion of changing and changing outcomes.
I like how you also said that you're creating some out-of-the-box initiatives to like actually fill, of course, recruiting goals and also fill your pipelines from the Black community. So Star, with your company, I would say or ask, what are some out-of-the-box initiatives your company is doing to fill, of course, Black employee pipelines?
Yeah, so my company's a little bit different because we're a new company and we are helping companies with these things that our pipeline's kind of easily filled. We have a lot of people reaching out to us to want to join our team.
Wonderful.
But yeah, so it's been great. But what I've seen other companies do, because I have been blessed with the ability to talk to a lot of companies and ERG members about what their company's doing and hearing about these lived experiences. I think some of, and I don't know how out of the box, I mean, I think it could be as simple as go where the Black people are. You know, in the legal world.
It's that simple.
It's that simple. In the legal world, specifically where I came from, there was a lot of school snobbery. So they would only go to like the top 10 ranked law schools, okay, and then try to get the African Americans there. And on the recruiting committee, I pushed so hard to say, look, we've got to do recruiting outside top 10. You always complain that there's not enough African Americans here. And you go to one HBCU, you go to Howard, and you think you're done. There's a lot more HBCUs, and you have to remember there are a lot of Black people.
I went to Lincoln University, LU, love you.
Yes, there are much more, there are a lot, and there are a lot of Black people at predominantly white institutions. So going there, going in the community, being present in the community, I think it's so important to be in the Black community, building bonds, building trust, having folks come to you for jobs instead of you looking for them. I think it's very important to be on campuses, whether they're HBCUs or predominantly white, make strides with the Black organizations on these campuses, create this bond of trust. And I think one of the things that I've seen recently or heard recently is company, they always went to minority career fairs, which I don't think is out of the box, but I think it's important to be there. But given COVID and things that are happening working remotely, having a virtual career fair where the only thing that can be shown is a racially neutral avatar, and all of anything that identifies you on your resume was asked to be removed so that it can really truly be a focus on your experiences, your education. There's no mention of race, and you don't see any of that on a resume, and you can't see them because of the racially neutral avatar. So I think that was a little bit out of the box. I hadn't really seen something so focused on racial neutral avatars in a virtual setting. But I think, De-Dee, I think it's as simple as just making sure you have a pipeline and you are exhausting those sources and not just focusing on one type of pipeline, thinking outside of the box and going where the Black people are if you want to bring Black employees into your company.
It's that simple. It's that simple. Go where the Black people are. HBCUs, community. Yeah. You know, we go to church as well virtually. Come to the service. You know, it's that simple. You know, we have the recruiters that sit in their office that, you know, just kind of dial it in. Then we have really great recruiters and talent acquisition people that really come to us. So, you know, we're looking for more of those type of talent acquisition teams. And Facebook, I love you, but you know, I see Miss Yvette coming up. So, you know, I want to respect the time here. It was good, wasn't it, y'all?
It was really good.
Good. You know, hopefully the conversation will continue at a later date. You mentioned small business, Greg Cunningham. I'm a small business. I have a website, Loftin Davis Consulting. My last name with my husband's name, Loftin Davis Consulting. I do, of course, anti-racist consulting training, webinars, keynote speaking. So feel free to visit my website. Just a shameless plug, but I thought small business, you know, it's just me. So
I love it.
Don't do that.
Well, you know,
Beautiful Miss Yvette, once again, thank you for having me host. I had a great time, I had a ball, and I'm sure the guests, so wise. Thank you. We needed your courageous voice. We needed you to amplify what your company is actually doing, and not just speaking to platitudes, but actually speaking to our community.
And a quick plug here, I'm a small business too. So check us out, www.kanarys.com. It's spelled a little funky. That's Kanarys. We did that for trademark purposes as well as creating branding. So check us out as well at www.kanarys.com.
All righty.
www.kanarys.com. Thank you. Any more small businesses in the panel?
Anybody want to shout somebody out? Well, I'm a small business. MOBE is a small business, and I just want to thank. And this is what small businesses can do in a downtime when there's it's like being a quarterback and you see a hole. You see an opportunity to have a conversation that nobody else is having, and it can be like a TV caliber conversation about what really matters to us, and that economic racial wealth gap is really what is the matter with Black America. We're hearing a lot of questions like that. What's the matter with Black America? It is that we are struggling to breathe in so many ways. We saw a man be killed on TV, and what we see every day is the slow death of Black families, the slow death of our children's hopes and dreams, the slow death of a mother who has seen her child be picked over for opportunities, perhaps be incarcerated in a system that they didn't even understand that they were doing something wrong. Right now, we have some trainings for young Black men in our nonprofit that presents MOBE called Real Men Charities. And part of like the Me Too movement, that no one had taught anybody that anybody could go to jail for saying something slick to a young lady. You know what I'm saying? And so there is a cultural disconnect between our community and popular culture because the trust is not there anymore. And so rebuilding the trust is one of the things we want to do, but you can't do that without conversations like this. So I really appreciate De-Dee, the energy you brought, Mita, your true brown self to the party, is very refreshing. Of course, Star, the fact that you are independent and able to teach or coach corporations into their greatness is just absolutely inspiring as a young woman. And Greg, who has been, he's shown throughout his career that he pushes his companies to think be a little more thoughtful and to show it, not just preach it, not just put it in the annual report, but to demonstrate. And we understand that there was a culture that was created at Target, and I really do believe that it was because Greg was in an important seat and the CEO had the ear of the CEO at Target, and now we see that U.S. Bank is really in a #1 position in many categories for their policies. So we thank you, Greg, for representing the real men of the world. And with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen next week. And I'm really excited because it is a conversation about Black men. It's a conversation predating the Monday before Father's Day. We're going to talk about real men and putting the face of Black fathers on Father's Day. And really, these have been invisible men in terms of their humanity, in terms of their love and appreciation for their families. The fact that they get married, they fall in love is something that's been missing from the conversation. And so our other brand, in addition to MOBE, is Real Men Cook. And so it's not about the cooking is the cook. And the realness is about the men that will perhaps have a face and be looked at differently. It's interesting that when these men face tragedy of death to unfair hands, we find out a lot about them. Mike Brown as the father, as a grandfather, as a loving man. George Floyd as a guy that raised his nephew and was the man in his church and his family and community. Why do we have to learn this after people are dead? So we want to put a face and a heart. We have been doing this for 31 years, so we get a chance to talk about that, and you'll meet some of the men next week. That's MOBE Monday next week at the same time and same place. You can go to our website right now, mobesymposium.com, and register so that it'll be very easy for you to sign on here to Zoom or catch us on Facebook Live. And our mission is to have us enjoy a life here in America that doesn't include so many negative connotations and has us an opportunity to be seen and not invisible. So thank you very much for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
And thank our sponsors, P&G and AARP.
Shout outs.
Shout outs. All right. Have a good evening, and thank you.
Thank you.